First up though, tell me, what does KPI stand for? Do you remember from the last lesson? Is it A, key performance indicator, or B, key platform investment? And the answer is A, it is a key performance indicator. Well done to everyone for getting that right. Then, did you know that browser cookies identify users, they change web pages and save information? We spoke briefly about them in the last lesson. There are two types of cookies. There's a session cookie, which is erased when closing a browser. And there is a persistent cookie, and expiration is set on creation, so they can actually last for many, many years, and some don't go away at all unless you remove them manually. Quite crazy. So we are on lesson 2. I'm not going to go through this whole outline, but you are at the end of this lesson, just 25% of the way through this module. So well done. Thanks for being here. What did we learn in the first lesson? We looked at digital marketing channels, common terms and acronyms, objectives and KPIs. We're spending some more time on objectives today, and performance marketing basics. Did you guys enjoy the first lesson? Any feedback? Anything you're unsure of still? Let us know, and we will definitely get back to you with an answer. What are we learning today? We are looking at marketing funnels, followed by determining our objectives. Then we will look at tracking performance and the importance of that, and a quick introduction into analytics and how it can help. What is a marketing sales funnel then? It is a collection of stages that you ideally want potential customers to move through towards your key objective. It's called a funnel due to the volume of potential customers decreasing the further down a funnel you go. But what does that even mean? If you think about it, is every purchase made without thinking about it beforehand? The answer is a resounding no. We are not all impulsive 100% of the time. So then the next thing to think about is, what does that thinking look like? And how does it change behavior? What kinds of things change? Well, firstly, information that we look for changes. How we look for it changes. And then where we look changes. So if we just go through a quick example, even though there will be a few examples of the specific funnels, let's just say in the beginning, the information that we look for might be reviews. How we look for it, we would be searching in different ways for those reviews. And where we look would be probably on search, maybe on social media. Then further down the funnel, we might be looking at pricing. So we might be comparing prices. How we look for that is, again, the way in which we search for it. Where do we look? Would be on the various websites of where the product is. Perhaps we might ask some friends if they've got it. You know, all those different things change depending on how far along in the decision process we are towards making that purchase. So why do you need a marketing sales funnel? It allows you to plan specifically how you'll bring in traffic, how you'll manage leads, and how you'll convert those leads into customers. And how does it allow you to do that? It enables you to serve different content relevant to the behavior of the person when they're in those different phases. It also enables you to optimize your communication methods and adapt your targeting strategies. For instance, you might see that many people are in the awareness phase, but they're not converting then down into the sales phase. Because you have these different phases and these different strategies in place, you should then be able to start pinpointing where there might be potential issues. I just want to bring this up again because it's going to come up a lot. What is a conversion? A conversion happens when a site visitor completes a desired action, for example, submitting a form or making a purchase. And there will be different conversions based on the phase of the funnel that someone is in. We will go through some examples shortly. Let us start with ADA. This is the traditional sales funnel that was created in 1898, so quite a long time ago. There are 4 stages to a sale. We're going to go through them all, and then I'll explain some examples of what potential customers would do in each stage. Firstly, we have awareness, then we have interest, desire, and action. Now, awareness, someone in that phase might just be seeing an ad, they might be reading a blog post, interacting with your social media. In interest, they could be visiting your site, researching your brand, and following your various social media pages. Within desire, they might be researching options, so doing comparisons, and perhaps submitting a lead for more information. And then, of course, there is action, which is making a purchase. Then the next funnel that we have is, I've just labeled it a 6-stage funnel. It has awareness, interest, consideration, intent, evaluation, and purchase. What this one has done is broken down the interest category into a few more, so consideration and intent. Now, some examples of what customer behavior or advertising efforts would be in these different phases are, for example, awareness would be general advertising. In the interest phase, consumers learn about the company and its products. So tactics in this stage could include things like targeted emails and encouraging newsletter signups. Consideration entails consumers who have become qualified leads that were submitted either during the awareness or interest phase. That can still happen. It just depends on the business. And then, of course, these should be further nurtured with remarketing. In this phase, you might offer free trials, perhaps specials, or push a specific product based on their demographics or whatever segment they're fallen in with your advertising. Then intent means someone who is interested in buying. So examples of consumer behavior in this stage would be requesting a demo or perhaps adding items to a shopping cart. Then evaluation is making a final decision. So working with marketing and sales would be required here to show that your product or service is the best choice. Marketing tactics here could be targeted campaigns, for example, based on what they put into their cart, and pushing their unique selling propositions. So what makes them better or stand out from the crowd. Essentially, this is where a business would remind the customer why they want to buy from them. Then, of course, the last is making a purchase, and that is just standard making a purchase. The so-called fault with this funnel is that it doesn't include retention and advocacy. Advocacy is a fancy word for word of mouth or people sharing their experience of your business with friends. You obviously want to make sure that the experience is as positive as possible. It's also much cheaper to inspire repeat purchases from existing customers than from new ones. And that's where remarketing comes in. So very important. Then we have the See, Think, Do, Care model, which is something that has been pioneered by Avinash Kaushik and Mark Grehan. What it does is, if we look at See, this entails a brand's largest qualified audience. We'll go through an example just now so you can see. In Think, it's the segment of consumers thinking about that particular thing. Do is consumers who are ready to buy. And then Care is ongoing communication to inspire repeat purchases. Now we have something called life cycle marketing, which is cyclical. It's a relatively newly coined term, but the methodology behind it isn't new, as some previous funnels have included everything that you're seeing, just in a different way. Unlike Ada, it takes into account loyalty and advocacy, and existing customers feed into further strategies and performance. There are different versions of this and the other funnels that we have been through. For example, in this one, it could be the attract, convert, nurture, and keep model but it's essentially saying the same thing. Then, just to show you the difference between a more traditional funnel like Ada and confirm how subjective digital marketing is, I've completely made up a funnel to illustrate what performance-based marketing means. We have view, act, and convert. It's a 3-stage funnel, and essentially all efforts are directed towards capturing the highest percentage of qualified or high intent users and driving them to convert. So it's avoiding people towards the top of the traditional funnels. So we're avoiding the awareness and interest phases. We're not interested technically in those people yet because they're not at the stage where they're ready to actually open their wallets and make a purchase. What this means is that optimizations are performed based on data. You only target the highest qualified audience, and all tactics are geared towards closing a sale. Basically, it's not the spray and pray method that Ada advocates. This does seem to go against what See, Think, Do, and Care promotes, but with a performance-focused model, you would be including existing customers. They would also be forming part of your retargeting strategies. You might be asking which funnel is better, and the answer is that is a subjective answer. What I can tell you though is that performance-focused funnels prioritize conversion. And what that means is we have a detailed retargeting strategy. We have a low priority on vanity metrics, and vanity metrics are things that you can't really do anything with. For example, impressions. You can't take an action based on impressions. Then upper funnel goals are tracked but not reported. So of course we do monitor them because we are aware that, from those different phases, people then do move down to the performance focused phases. So the do or the act, version of these different funnels. But we don't report on them. We don't take credit for those goals because they haven't actually got anything to do with our campaigns. Then other funnels, they prioritize all objectives. So there's generally a detailed content strategy because that is generally what is required when you're trying to target people in the upper funnel. They're looking for information, so you need to be able to provide that information. Then there is generally a wide channel use just because you are trying to reach people in all these different phases. It's generally a big budget involved, so you can afford to use a wide range of channels. And then there would be a variety of KPIs depending on the phase. In the beginning, perhaps it might just be a click, so website visit. Then it might be time on site longer than 2 minutes. It could be subscribing to a newsletter before then making a purchase. There are various, it depends on your site and your offering and what you have in place. So I'm going to take you through a funnel example for the See, Think, Do, and Care model using a mechanic. People in the C phase would be essentially all eligible drivers. So not just everyone, but everyone who is over the legal age of, or is the legal age and over to drive a car. That is what or who See, Think, Do, Care would be targeting. If we move on to Think, that would be people who are current car owners. So not people who have issues with their cars or who are looking for mechanics, just current car owners, all of those people. Then people in the Do phase would be people who are actually using the mechanic services. And of course, in that phase, it's all to do with the business ensuring that the customer has the best experience ever so that they come back. And that is where Care falls in because you would retain them with good communication and service. If we go to a VAC example, or View, Act, and Convert, using mechanics as well, the view people, or in that phase, would be people looking for car services or mechanics. So not just all eligible car owners, but people who own cars who are now looking for services and repairs. Then Act would, of course, be people who are either submitting a lead or making a phone call. So they would be contacting that mechanic. And then Convert would be people who are using the mechanic services. And again, the same thing applies. It would then be up to the business to ensure that they are receiving as as amazing an experience as possible. So let's say you choose a sales funnel that you're comfortable with. You've broken down all your potential or existing customers into different phases and determined how you're going to communicate or target them differently within those phases. What if that doesn't work? Because it doesn't always work, or at least it doesn't always produce the desired results. It might be working, but not as well as you want it to. Then you need to look at your customer journey. What is the difference between a customer journey and a sales funnel? Well, the customer journey is a detailed outline of every step a lead takes to become a paying customer, whereas the marketing funnel is a model that businesses use to market to people at different stages of the buying cycle. We will be spending more time on customer journeys in the next lesson, which is lesson 3. Before we jump into some more examples, I just want to go over what B2B and B2C is. So, business to business is B2B and business to consumer is B2C. Now, I think it's pretty straightforward, but essentially B2B is businesses who provide services or products to other businesses. And then business to consumer is a business that provides a product or service to people, to consumers. Now, the reason I wanted to explain that is because the funnels between a B2B and a B2C can be quite different. So let's just look at an example using the 6-stage funnel. Some of them might be repeated, but then there are some key differences. So in the awareness phase, both would be looking for information. In the interest phase, B2C would be looking at products or services, and B2B would be looking at specific products or services and reviews. Under consideration, B2C might compare and read reviews, whereas B2B would be sharing research with their partners. Then under intent, we would have either adding a product to a cart under B2C, and B2B might be something like requesting a demo. Under evaluation, under B2C, we would review and go to checkout, whereas B2B might receive a contract. And then, of course, a sale would be to complete the transaction. So based on whether you are a B2C or a B2B, your the funnel stages, or what people might be doing in those different stages, will of course be different. Moving on to objectives, and something that comes up a lot is how do you determine them? Now, if you are an entrepreneur or a business owner, then you need to consider a few things. Namely, where you want your business to be in the next year and in the next 5 years. That needs to be a proper plan, written out, detailed information. And that is really then the start of where you are setting your goals. Then what challenges is the business and the industry facing? It's incredibly important not only to look at the business, but the industry that it's in as well, because there are certain things that sometimes are or aren't in your control, and a business actually needs to adapt and change because of things that are happening in the industry as a whole. For example, in lesson 1, we were talking about the software as a service industry, and how the removal of support for the third-party cookies by Google in the next few years requires them to make a huge change. Now, that is not something that is within their control, but it is something that they have to deal with and adapt to. Then what is the purpose of the product or service? And not in any kind of salesy way, but literally, what is the purpose of the product or service? Then you also need to consider, is there a market for the offering, or does one need to be created? This is in the case of a completely new business. That's where research needs to come in, and we will be spending more time on that kind of thing. If one needs to be created, then that is a much harder job with a much higher budget required and all sorts of things that need to be in place. So before taking that kind of thing on, I would rather suggest changing the product or service. Then what does this market look like? And finally, what is your marketing budget? Each of these questions on their own might not help you determine your objective, but if you combine all this information, then you should have a pretty good idea of what you need or want to achieve. So let's go through some different objectives and what they actually mean. First up, we have market share, and that objective is to increase your market share, thereby decreasing competitors. You're basically wanting to take up more space. If you look at this image here, it is exactly that. It's like filling the graph or the pie to such an extent that your competitors don't have much space left. I very much imagine that this kind of objective would not be taken on by a small or even medium-sized business. It's a pretty big goal. Then there is differentiation, which is referring to creating a unique identity in a competitive market. So essentially, it's about your USPs and your branding, making sure that people see you and know you and choose you over other people in a competitive market. Now, I'm making it sound like it's the easiest thing on the planet, but it absolutely isn't. And again, this is something that generally would require quite a bit of money, a lot of strategy and thought and research to be involved. But yes, it is out there. And we have customer reviews, which is trying to improve the service or product ratings. Knowing how important customer reviews are and the fact that if you have more positive reviews, then people are more likely to convert, makes this very important. And it is generally a goal within other goals, if that makes sense. So branding or awareness or reputation, customer reviews comes up a lot, and rightly so. Then we have something called market development, which is expanding into a new market to increase revenue. Lots of research required, still very risky, but it is generally a good way to increase if you're not seeing any gains in your existing area. Then reputation, hugely important. This is establishing or building on a brand's reputation, very closely linked to branding. So I would say that branding would be the umbrella goal, and then let's say reputation and customer reviews would be part of that. As would brand engagement, which is increasing the interaction rate with customers. So on whatever channels that you communicate with customers, let's say it's social media, email marketing, support, etc., then just improving on that rate of interaction. A very worthy goal and very important. Sales that you're seeing or the traffic that you're seeing or whatever it is. So tracking beyond the nice to know metrics, and what I mean by that is those vanity metrics I mentioned earlier, the things that you can see that are standard, they are tracked in every single platform, let's say Facebook Business Manager or Google Ads. You can see impressions and clicks and therefore CTR and all that stuff, but there's nothing much that you can do with that until you know whether those keywords or that ad or that content is actually converting into something meaningful. So tracking, incredibly important. It makes your marketing measurable, as I've just said. Affect the bottom line, incredibly important. And then you can plan and test changes effectively. So you actually know what you're doing. You're not going in blind. This is what separates digital marketing from traditional marketing. Because the problem with traditional marketing is that it isn't measurable. You don't know if the promo flyers that you sent out did anything, or the billboard that is up by the highway that is not digital is doing anything. And of course, there are aspects of digital marketing which are still not measurable. But it's far more measurable than the traditional counterparts. And so not having tracking in place is just not a good idea. Now, before I go on more and more about how important tracking is, I want you to tell me, what does CTR stand for? Is it A, cost through revenue? Or is it B, click-through rate? Please pop your answer into Morpheus. I'm sure you will all get this right. It is B, click-through rate. Well done, everybody. Great stuff. I hope these are helping you remember all our different acronyms that are going on in digital marketing. They are important for you to understand and remember. So generally, the first thing that comes up when we talk about tracking is something called Google Analytics. It is a free service that provides website statistics and analytical tools, and it is the most widely used analytics platform in the world. There are many others, many of which cost a pretty penny, but Google Analytics is free. If you're going to understand anything about Google Analytics, then you need to know what an attribution model is. It is the rule or set of rules that determines how credit for sales and conversions is assigned to touchpoints in conversion paths. Sounds a bit more complicated than it needs to be, perhaps, but essentially you have an ad on Facebook. It will tell you, if you've set things up properly, which is the last clicked ad that led to the conversion that you are tracking, which is the last clicked keyword that you have in your search campaigns that led to a sale for those types of conversions. And the touch point is that keyword or that ad or whatever the consumer last interacted with. There are various attribution models, which we'll be spending more time on later in the module. Google Analytics. So we have then social media presence, and this is something that you can view on a company's page. You can view competitor activity as well as current ads being promoted. So if you go to a competitor's social media page, I'm specifically referring here to Facebook, then you can actually go and see in a tab all the ads that they currently have running. And that is a great way to see what they're actually doing without having to pay, to find out what's happening. Then, of course, any owned data that you have, whether it's from site tracking or email signups, etc., that is the perfect resource when it comes to market analysis. So you could do that with your owned data and whether you have reports in place. Again, if you guys have own data, what platforms do you use? I'd love to know. Do you use Salesforce at all or Marketo? Are any of you using MailChimp? That's an email platform. SharpSpring. There are so many, and they can all provide you with a huge amount of data to do something with. On the keyword research side, there is a site where you can actually just test which it's meant to be for your ads, for your Google ads, to test whether they are appearing. But what is great about it is that you can actually check other ad results, for the keywords that you want to bid on and see who's appearing without it affecting your existing search history. So it's called isearchfrom.com. There will also be some bonus content available specifically on looking at Google Trends as well as the social media presence. As I mentioned, keyword research, we're looking at far more detail in Module 2, so I'm going to leave it there for now. But play around, see what tools you have available, look at what free options there are. There are many. I definitely don't know of all of them, so let me know if you find something cool. So it's all very well and good to have these fantastic objectives and have lovely money to spend on marketing and all of that. But if you don't have tracking in place, then it is completely pointless, because then you have no idea of what you're doing in terms of what channel is performing or is bringing you the sales that you're seeing or the traffic that you're seeing or whatever it is. So tracking, beyond the nice to know metrics, and what I mean by that is those vanity metrics I mentioned earlier, the things that you can see that are standard, they are tracked in every single platform, let's say Facebook Business Manager or Google Ads. You can see impressions and clicks and therefore CTR and all that stuff. But there's nothing much that you can do with that until you know whether those keywords or that ad or that content is actually converting into something meaningful. So tracking, incredibly important. It makes your marketing measurable, as I've just said. You then know which channels affect the bottom line, incredibly important. And then you can plan and test changes effectively. So you actually know what you're doing. You're not going in blind. This is what separates digital marketing from traditional marketing. Because the problem with traditional marketing is that it isn't measurable. You don't know if the promo flyers that you sent out did anything, or the billboard that is up by the highway that is not digital is doing anything. And of course, there are aspects of digital marketing which are still not measurable. But it's far more measurable than the traditional counterparts. And so not having tracking in place is just not a good idea. Now, before I go on more and more about how important tracking is, I want you to tell me, what does CTR stand for? Is it A, cost through revenue? Or is it B, click-through rate? I'm sure you will all get this right. It is B, click-through rate. Well done, everybody. Great stuff. I hope these are helping you remember all our different acronyms that are going on in digital marketing. They are important for you to understand and remember. So generally, the first thing that comes up when we talk about tracking is something called Google Analytics. It is a free service that provides website statistics and analytical tools. And it is the most widely used analytics platform in the world. There are many others, many of which cost a pretty penny, but Google Analytics is free. If you're going to understand anything about Google Analytics, then you need to know what an attribution model is. It is the rule or set of rules that determines how credit for sales and conversions is assigned to touchpoints in conversion paths. Sounds a bit more complicated than it needs to be, perhaps, but essentially you have an ad on Facebook. It will tell you, if you've set things up properly, which is the last clicked ad that led to the conversion that you are tracking, which is the last clicked keyword that you have in your search campaigns that led to a sale. That is what it means by assigning a credit for those types of conversions. And the touch point is that keyword or that ad or whatever the consumer last interacted with. There are various attribution models, which we'll be spending more time on later in the module. Google Analytics has what we call a last click attribution model, which means that all credit is given to the final click, and that results you see in other platforms may differ just because they have or may have different attribution models. And it also depends on something called a conversion window. So there are lots of different factors that could show up differently. For example, if you're looking at Google Analytics and then you're going into your Facebook reports and seeing something completely different. If the difference is huge, then tracking and the goal setup should be checked. It is normal for there to be some discrepancies. I'd say maybe like a maximum of 20, in difference volume. If it's bigger than that, then there's a problem. We will be spending more time on attribution in lesson 6 because there is more than one attribution model. So we have that to look forward to. Then there are some analytics terms to understand before you actually go into the platform. There is user, which is referring to a person. Then there is session, which is a group of interactions within your site or with your site. And your session duration then is the number of minutes that someone was interacting with your site. What happens with a session is that if there has been inactivity on the site for 30 minutes, then the session will be closed. And what I mean by that is, let's say someone's on your site, they're browsing around and then they get distracted, but they don't leave your site. They just keep it there open in their browser. Google, after 30 minutes of inactivity on that page, will close the session. So then if they interact with the site again, then a new session will open up. So one person can be responsible for more than one session. Just like one person can be responsible for more than one impression. Then we have bounce rate, which we mentioned in the first lesson, and this is the percentage of users who exited your site after the first page. So they just landed on, let's say, your home page, not interested, and they left. That would be a bounce. Then there is conversion rate, which will also come up in general throughout the course, and it doesn't just apply to analytics, as it's just referring to the number of people who have converted divided by all visitors. And then finally, there is direct, which we also mentioned in the first lesson, and this is users who went directly to your site by typing or bookmarking your URL. Again, direct is generally a result of other marketing, but it is important to monitor when you're looking at things like branding. ad recall, reputation, etc. It's a very quick introduction into how to create an account. It is very straightforward when you actually go through the process. So do have a look. There are other resources as well. But the first thing you need is a Google account. So that is an email address, essentially. If you think about Gmail, that is the first step. Then you need to go to analytics.google.com. That is the URL. You will select Start for Free. You will see on the top right. It's generally a blue button. And then you would use that Google account that you've created or that you already have to log in. Once you're in, you would select your account name. So that's essentially the business or whatever it is you want your account to be known as. Then there are various tick boxes at the bottom, and I recommend just keeping them all. It's just to make sure you get updates and all of those kinds of things. Then you would select what you want to measure. So most often it's a website. More and more it's becoming apps. There are millions and millions of apps. Or if you want to measure both, that is in a testing phase. Then you would add your website, so your URL, the industry that you are in. It doesn't really matter what you choose here. It's just for Google's kind of tracking purposes. And then the time zone. It's important to include the time zone where the actual business is situated. Once you've done that, you will have access to your account, essentially. And at the bottom left, that blue little cog is the admin section. And this is where you manage everything to do with your account. If you look in the middle there, you can see something called tracking info. And this is where you will get the code that you need to put on every page of your site. It looks a little something like this. It is JavaScript. It's a piece of JavaScript code. Like I mentioned, if you don't really know what that is or understand anything to do with coding and you're not feeling too confident in it, get someone's help. It's not something that would cost a lot to get someone's help with. If they're going to charge you a lot, then tell them to go away because it really is quite easy. But this is, as I mentioned, where you will get this code, and this would be what you would send on to that developer. It is called the global site tag, and essentially it needs in the back end, so in your code of your website, it needs to be added before what is called the closing head tag of every page on your website. To give you an example of what a head tag looks like, if you look at the top right, this is actually Zara.com. This is the opening head tag that you're seeing. So the difference would be that it would have a little / after the first bracket. That's what makes it closing. So as long as the code is between the head tag and the closing head tag, it will track properly. So once you've installed your Google Analytics code, and there's been some time for data to accrue, then this is an example of a report that you would have access to. This account is actually a demo account for the Google Merchandise Store. Well, it's real data, but everyone has access to it or can request access to it. So I do recommend that you do that. Go ahead and Google the Google Merchandise Store Analytics account and follow the steps there. And then you'll have access, and you can't break anything. You don't have access to anything that could change it. So just go ahead and give it a go. So this is an audience overview. There is an overview for each of these topics on the left. Then you can drill down further into different things. For example, site content, you can drill down to the page, not just the overall website. This is indicating the number of people who have visited your website over a certain amount of time. And this can be monitored and compared over time so that you can see how it's growing and whether it's growing, of course. If we quickly close up the audience category and go into acquisition, this is where you would see performance for all your different marketing campaigns, whether it's organic or paid. So this would be a really interesting section to look at if you do go ahead and request access. Google Ads and the Search Console aren't there by default. They do need to be linked to analytics. Yes, so there is a lot of information here, and it does take quite a bit of time to understand it all properly, but are definitely some basics that you can understand quite easily, which will help you when it comes to optimizing and monitoring your marketing. There is more on Google Analytics in Module 3. We will be going through some of the key reports, as well as learning how to create audiences and view filters and properties within analytics. So it's going to be great. It's in Module 3 because it is quite advanced, but it is important for you to have an introduction to it now. Then apart from Google Analytics, there is a little something called UTMs, which stands for Urchin Tracking Module. What is a UTM? It is a piece of code that can be added to any URL, which is used for tracking more information about campaigns. How are they helpful? They provide more info to Google Analytics, and you may have many links, and UTMs tell you which links are doing the work. So when it comes to the first point here, and then it links to the second, Google Analytics can tell you where traffic has come from. It can break down the different demographics of people who are visiting your site, etc. But what it can't sometimes do is tell you the campaign that the traffic is coming from, the exact ad that the traffic is coming from, or the keyword, etc. And that's where UTMs come in. They provide this information to Google. So just to reiterate, this is what UTMs can answer for you in terms of tracking. It can tell you which keywords are converting if you haven't linked your Google Ads to analytics, or you're using a completely different search engine which can't link to analytics. It can tell you which email gave you the most traffic from which campaign. If you add that UTM, then it gives analytics that additional info. And then, was it organic or paid content on social that produced the best results in terms of bottom line, revenue, profit, etc.? So there are several elements of a UTM tag. We first have the website URL, which makes sense. URL stands for the Universal Resource Locator, and this is the page or the pages on your site where your advertising directs potential customers to. Then there is the source, which is the platform where your campaigns are, for example, Google Search or Facebook. The medium, which is referring to the type of ad or spend within the source, for example, PPC or email or display. And then name, which is the name of your campaign, for example, summer mailer. So here is an example of a URL with a UTM appended to it. At the top there, we have the URL, which is digitalmarketing.com/professional diploma. Then if you see the question mark and UTM, that's where it starts. Then we have the source, which is the first element, and that's Google. Then the medium, which is search, so we know what campaign type it is. And then the campaign UTM is hi guys, and that's for you. We can now see Google or analytics would take this information, and in our reporting, we would be able to see that this has come from Google search under the campaign hi guys. There are additional elements that you can add, which, as I mentioned, then can pick up different keywords or different ad content. That requires a bit more work. There's some almost not a coding involved, but there are different custom parameters that you can create. We'll be talking about that in the last module. But yes, this is an example of a UTM, and that is what you would copy paste into any of your advertising. So that is that for lesson 2. What are we learning in lesson 3? Don't go anywhere. I'm going to give you an example of the challenge response that I put together. just in case you are interested. Lesson 3, we're going to be looking at who is my target market, followed by what targeting options are there across channels. Then how can I use remarketing? And finally, what are customer journeys? So this is going to be a very cool lesson, again, jam-packed with information. I hope that you're finding it good so far. It's meeting your expectations. Today's lesson, just recapping, we looked at marketing funnels, determining objectives, tracking performance, and then a quick introduction to Google Analytics and UTMs. This is the challenge example that I was talking about. So you were asked to put together the top KPIs and channels and reasons why you chose those channels for this made-up client. The main KPIs would be CPL, so cost per lead, conversion rate, and then your CPCs, because that would determine how many leads you can get with your budget, and then of course at what cost. And improving the conversion rate would have a positive effect. Decreasing the CPCs would have a positive effect, all on the main KPI, which would be cost per lead, along with how many leads there are. So I would use Facebook, Google search, and affiliate marketing. And the reason why I chose these is because Facebook offers large reach and different targeting options. Google search offers high quality due to intent, and affiliates expose you to a new audience at a low cost and with minimal effort. Thank you so much, guys. I will see you for lesson 3 very soon.